welcome to the PrepMe podcast. I'm Tora, and I'm also with Chancey. I'm not going to try his last name.
Oh, come on. I want you to try it once.
Vino.
You can do it. You got it.
Yes, finally.
All right.
We are the hosts of the best, and actually the only, but the best pre-med podcast made especially for Canadian medical students. So this podcast, a good reminder of those of our regular listeners, have been made possible by the very generous support from Prep 101, which is the most comprehensive Mcat test prep company in Canada. So today, I'm going to be, usually it's Chancey with all the knowledge and he's got the big brains, but I'm going to be sitting in the hot seat. It's Chancey's turn.
You've got big brains.
Well,
You've got big brains. You got
debatable. It's Chancey's turn to ask me everything I know, because today, what are we talking about, Chancey? Cars.
You See, we said it differently. We just said it differently. You said it differently than I said it.
I'm like, cars, big inflection, and you go.
Deflection, down, cars, like bad memories, cars.
Okay, well, I think I know the answer to this question. What was your least favorite subject on the MCAT?
If I didn't just give it away, I think it's obvious it was cars. I found cars took me the longest to study for, took me the longest to get skillful at, and took me the longest to see a score improvement on. So all the reasons that I just said, cars was my least favorite section of the MCAT.
Why? I love it.
Why do you love it so much?
Okay, because here's the thing. Because I think that it just kind of tests a totally different, I mean, it does, that's what it's there for, but it tests such a different brain that I love tapping into. It's got more of a creative side. It's a lot less black and white. You know, I live my life in black and white, right? As a scientist, it's everything is just like, it's either yes or no. And this is just living in the gray and just embracing it and being really comfortable with a level of discomfort. I think there's just, I could, go off and get romantic about it. And like, there's a philosophy there to how to live your life. But no, I love it. I think that it is such an important section because the med schools like it and think it's very important. But I think that it just trains an area of thought that will serve you well for the rest of your life, medicine or not. I think that it's just such a valuable skill.
You're probably right. And you know what, to your point, you're not only like answering the question, but you're sort of teaching already, because your enthusiasm is what I needed to teach myself to have every time I tackled a CARS passage, which I'm sure you're going to get into. But to medicine, you're right. CARS is probably the most, this seems silly to say, but it's probably the most applicable section of the MCAT that we utilize in our testing format, in the sense that it's not going to be just, here's a paragraph of scientific knowledge, give me your scientific answer. There's so much more to it in terms of getting the flavor of the information and really appraising a passage, which I don't think you do probably any more than you do when you're doing CARS. It just took me way longer to do it, and there's a reason you teach it and I don't.
Okay, but what made you find, like, what was the hardest part of getting engaged with CARS?
I think the hardest part for me was two-part. One was, like you said, and like you show and demonstrate, is having this enthusiasm for no matter what passage you see, whether it's passage 1, 2, through 7 or 8, having that same enthusiasm saying, this is going to be great. I'm going to know lots about this, or I'm going to enjoy reading this, and having that positive energy to increase my retention of whatever I've actively read and need for the questions. That was hard to learn, because I think I'm one to quickly get into something and be like, either A, I'm confused and I'm not enjoying this, or B, this is very boring and I forget what I just read. So that's one piece.
Okay, and I did say that you were going to ask me the questions, but my hosting hat is still on. I have to step back. You have asked questions for me, right?
I do. I have so many, because I'm thinking back, like if I was doing this all again and I had you as my mentor, I have like so many questions I would have asked back then. And if you made me write CARS again now, I'd probably be better at it, but I'd still want some tips. So I think, given how much time you've spent instructing CARS and all the vast sort of diversity and number of students that have come with questions to you, I'm sure, in the classroom setting, what are some of your general tips towards CARS for folks like me that come from a science background and haven't really written a test that's formatted like CARS? Like, what makes CARS different, and how can I get a leg up on CARS?
I think that that idea, just that, is that recognizing it's different from the sciences, that you study different, you practice different, that you train yourself differently, and that will serve you well across many different facets. But I think that one thing that it is different, treat it differently, but you still need to study, practice, learn about how to do CARS. And I think that the biggest tip is to throw away everything you know about test taking and live in that uncertainty. And that is because if you're reading a passage the biggest way to do this and to do well in cars and do so quickly is to inhabit the author, is to really visualize, and I like to say stereotype the absolute crap out of the author. Okay, there's this one passage that's about, we read this one in the exam crackers books, and it's all about what kind of knots you should use for various. Oh, you're a sailor, you know all about knots, okay. But okay, I don't know anything about it, and I'm like, isn't there just one kind of knot, like I tie my shoes with, and then I can't get it out forever? So there's this one passage about knots, and it's 500 words, all about all these different types of knots, and I'm like, okay. Students, who would write this? Someone put pen to page and wrote their outline and thought, I'm going to write a big chapter about knots. And so who would write that? And of course, we stereotype and say, okay, I think it's a guy, first of all. I think the obvious thing is like, if I was the author, what would I look like? I'd have a French mustache. For sure, like the one with the curled ends. I would be wearing like a sailor's hat, like a Tilly hat, the full brim. I would be wearing 3/4 length pulled up white socks and topsiders, nice tight fitting shorts, but I'd be fit and tanned, right? But I'd be kind of this old man, like kind of grizzled, like I'd be a sailor, pipe maybe not. But as soon as you start to think about who would write 500 words about knots, I see this retired sailor.
So you got the sailor looking the way you did, sitting on the pier, tying knots on the side of the wharf. That's what I've got in my head right now, based on what you're painting.
Romanticizing about knots, right? Exactly.
Fair,
exactly.
Fair.
So you inhabit that, you become that. And it sounds, I get it, it sounds ridiculous, but it's so important because so many questions about cars on the exam are like, okay, now you know what the author thinks about knots. How would this author feel about various woodworking tools? And it would be like, he cares about which woodworking tool you use for what project, and you need a repertoire. You don't get just like one screwdriver that does it all. You need every single tool in the book because you have to use the right knot for the right situation. And it's that. And so if you can, after the first paragraph, sit back, and sometimes I'll physically sit back. I'll sit back, look up in the sky and be like, who's writing this? Why? That's it. Who's writing this and why? And I jot it down, especially if I start to lose a little bit of momentum when I'm doing exams, I'll write down like A, who's the author, and M, what's the main idea, and I'll just jot down some like little 3/4 length white socks. Right?
And would you use your scrap paper for this, like on the Mcat, or are you thinking in your head? Okay.
I write a lot in cars, and I think actually generally as a skill, I write a lot more than I generally suggest. It works for me just because I write really quickly. Some students find that it takes them a lot of time and it's a bit of a distraction, but I map significantly. That's something we can talk about in a bit. We do that for all the subjects. I map a lot. I'll write out the main idea. I'll write out the description of the author, especially it's a way to snap me out of lulls. So these are the kinds of tips and tricks you can't really get on your own. That's that kind of guidance and mentorship that you need, but those are the things I offer.
Now, I come to think of the section back when I was actively studying and writing it, and I have lots of colleagues that come from different majors, and it's great in medicine that you don't have to come from bio. You can come from anything at all, and you can come from working for 10 to 20 years and back to medicine. But I guess, is it wrong or right to assume that somebody who comes from an English background or who's done the poli-sci, the anthropology, the humanities, are they going to be from the foundational good at cars?
I generally find that is a trend, that people who are usually reading for the gray areas and not reading for the facts, because a lot of science students were trained to read a paragraph and highlight the facts and what we need to know, right? And people in the humanities are more reading for the main idea, the thesis, the treatise of the paper. And so I've actually taught philosophy students who have successfully gotten into medicine. I've taught music majors. I've taught a wide range of people who are, and I'll only ever talk about students who actually actively got into medicine. And I do find that an arts background makes you better at cars. That's not saying that science students cannot do well. It's just, you've got that, just a little bit of an uphill battle before you start on the same footing. And then it's building the skills and strategies. So it's you just kind of got to get up to the almost reading skills, just the ability to really read for the main idea, which humanities teaches all the time. And then it's not just the humanities trained students are naturally good at cars. There's still all kinds of skills and tactics you need to learn and ways that you can perform better at cars. It's not something that you just come up and bang out a 132.
And do you think in cars that there is like a certain trend as to the subjects that come up in cars, or is it really just as wide and diverse as it seems, and like you could never predict what you're going to read on the next page? Like in your experience, what do you think?
I've never been able to predict them. I like, one time you'll be reading about some New York Met Opera review, and then the next thing you're reading about New Zealand legal system stuff. And I don't know, do you remember any of the subject on your MCAT?
I'm trying to think. So like it's all collided now, active versus practice. But I remember like certainly like government, anthro. I'm pretty sure geography maybe at some times.
Psych. I mean, not some psych, but like some, I don't know, the human behavior.
Yeah, I remember
Sociology.
getting like lots of like sort of arts sort of derived, some poli-sci, a lot of like, I don't know why it stands out. Maybe it's because they were so difficult, but I seem to remember a lot of passages on just art as an actual form and art as like a product and how to make art and an artist's view on how they go about painting a certain scene or this and that. And I remember just thinking like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm out of my element here.
Imagine like the New York Times reviewing Picasso's most recent exhibit.
Yeah.
And it gets into all of the, I don't know, whatever art people talk about. But yeah, it's like that. And I think that maybe it's just my general enthusiasm for life, but I think that's one of the things that has always been my strength in cars is that you read a passage and you're like, heck yeah, I love this. I'm going to learn something new, you know? And actually, Chancey, you know this, it's one of my dirty little secrets is that I have actually written cars passages for fun. And sometimes I'll read
For fun? Sorry, you said for fun?
I know. Well, because it just like helps me get into the groove for teaching. I know. And so I've actually written, I don't know, 7 or 8, not written as in performed, but actually created. And anyways, it's nerdy.
Okay,
I know. So
okay.
I know. I'm blushing, everyone. But one interesting one that I thought was a fantastic article was like 500 words on Bitcoin. Right? And it was like on
and applicable.
cryptocurrency.
Okay.
Right? And I did this a few years ago. And so now it's like obviously all over the place. But so those kinds of topics and where one of this challenges of cars, and I think one of the skills that you can be taught and you can learn is like how to love every passage. I love the most boring passages out there. Have you ever noticed that the boring passages, the ones where you're like, oh my God, I'm going to fall asleep, have the easiest questions associated with them, the more straightforward questions.
100%. And then you're like kicking yourself because you spent all this time trying to read the boring and stay active. And then the questions come up and you're like, oh, I wasted so much time going through that.
Yeah. And the questions are often so straightforward. And you're like, all I had to do was just read the passage and just enjoy the passage in whatever form that means. And you do really well. The enjoyable reads, the ones that tell this story of some historical figure and like Joan of Arc, and it's discussing her trajectory and her demise. And you're like, this is so cool. I'm learning so much. And then the questions are so obtuse. As soon as I start to enjoy a passage, I'm like, oh, crap.
Questions are going to suck.
Yeah, the questions are going to be so hard. I have to really get into my obtuse brain and like start thinking about something totally different. So, I mean, yeah. So these are kinds of things that take practice, but I think that guided practice. I feel like it's really hard to learn about cars without without listening to this episode, I guess.
And with that, you mentioned like this term mapping, and I guess for like listeners, what do you mean by that? Like when you say like mapping a passage, what does that entail?
I'm actually going through this right now with my my 4th year students at U of A, and that is develop an outline for your paper, right? And you've been taught this since like junior high, and nobody does it, right? You develop an outline of what you want to say, why you want to say it for each and every paragraph, and what the flow of ideas is. Mapping is in cars, it's like you're reverse engineering the author's outline. You've become the author. You've decided that you are now a middle-aged Black woman sitting on a porch writing about, I don't know, whatever her expertise might be, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're reading about that, you've inhabited that person, and now you're imagining, after reading their little essay, and going, what would their outline have been like? Those 3 words for every paragraph. Why did they use this example? And so it's like, it might be I don't know, I can think of something, someone who just recently hiked the Slovenian Alps. Okay. And you've become this person wearing lederhosen and, you like eating pretzels, and you're wandering around Slovenia. And so you're sitting there and you're imagining, and they're first going to start with their most favorite picturesque memory. And that's where you'd start. And then you'd talk about the trials and tribulations and how you overcame them. And so what you do in a map is you say, the scene, or started in Ljubljana, which is, I happen to know, is the capital of Slovenia.
You know a lot about this.
I know. I don't know.
Great
I am
example.
kind of making this up. I hope no Slovenians are listening, because I'm going to butcher a lot of this stuff. I'm pretty sure they don't wear lederhosen in Slovenia. But anyways, we can imagine. And then, it's like, okay, summer, crystal clear blue waters on the shores of on the shores of the Adriatic. And then you get into, okay, the challenge. What was the challenge, and how did the author overcome this? And was it guided, or was it help from a stranger, or was it something internal fortitude and human condition? And what you do is you sort of just create the outline of this passage. What that does is it allows you to get into why the author wrote it that way. That's all it's about. What was the author's main point that they were trying to make with each and every paragraph? That's kind of the secret of cars. It's not note-taking. Mapping is a skill. Some students, I map, again, everything all the time, 100%. I've tried to not map, and I do poorly. So I'm like, I'll just map. It's easy for me. Some students find that they don't write fast enough, that their maps tend to be really convoluted, and it's just overwhelming, and it just distracted. I kind of think as mapping as a skill you need to master. It takes practice. We do lots of drills when I'm teaching it about how to map. And also, your mapping becomes something to rely on. I think most importantly when you hit a lull. Chancey, you know this. You hit lulls in the exam. It's 6 hours and 15 minutes. Right?
Yeah, I hit one or two, one or two,
not
or
just
17.
I shouldn't say lulls. I should say you hit, insurmountable walls during the exam, of confidence breaking down, of exhaustion, of all kinds of things. And for me, it's like having that skill in the back pocket of being able to map allows me to, when I'm doing an exam, I'm writing 9 passages. On the 4th or 5th passage, I'm kind of like, I don't need to do this. Why am I doing this? And I'm like, no, I have to focus. And I'll return to mapping even more in order to just keep me focused and keep me engaged and keep me having that energy that I need to do the exam. So mapping is, I take it or leave it, thing to do for every passage, but it's something you should have in your toolkit and you use when you need to. It happens to be my hammer. I use it all the time.
No, fair enough. I think, when I was learning and doing it, I certainly was mapping, and that was something that was new to me, because you're taking it one step further, like you said. Like, not only are you wearing the jacket, shirt, hat of the author, but now you're trying to think in terms of when they were drafting that piece of work, how did they make their outline, and why was it chosen in the particular flow that it was ultimately written for, and in its final form. So you're taking me back, and it's good. It's not all nightmares. Some of it's good, and it just shows that, like, a lot of these, you do this obviously for a reason, because you're proficient, and many students succeed like under your wing, and with companies like Prep 101, obviously there's great tactics out there. But I guess students, they may listen to us here, they may attend seminars from other companies, or just have other books. What do you give to, I guess, for advice to those students that either A, are thinking about writing a car section for the first time, or maybe they're just so full of information and sort of clouded by all the different resources and advice that's out there, and forgetting maybe what's important? What's your advice and insight for those students?
It can be really overwhelming. One of the things that I like to sort of think about is that there's all these tactics, these skills, test-taking skills that you need to establish during your car's journey. And it's like adding tools to your toolbox and becoming proficient in how to use all those tools and being comfortable with each one. But I think you should train them one by one. So for instance, you might have a week in your own self-study where you're doing, I'm just going to practice paraphrasing the question stem. I'm going to break down and find the typical question types and figure out ways that work best for paraphrasing. And so, for instance, there's a lot of questions on the Mcat that always trip me up. Like, I just find my brain gets turned into a bit of a pretzel. And that is when they're like, which of the following is contrary to the main idea expressed in the passage, or what the author strongly disagree with. And if I paraphrase that as just opposite the main idea, I've already composed my main idea. Sometimes I've even written it down. And those are the types of questions where it's like I've developed a little bit of a hack, right? And it's like that works 99% of the time, opposite of the main idea. And so there's these skills, and that's a skill of paraphrasing, identifying question types that you build. Then maybe the next week, you don't do this all at once. Maybe the next week you identify all the so-called distractors, the really formulaic ways that the Mcat likes to tempt you into picking the wrong answer. The extreme is a great example. When in the answer choice there's an always or a never. And those are like, really? Always? Like, I don't know anything about hiking the Slovenian Alps, but always? Do you always have to? Does it always rain? And those kinds of things. And you're like, well, no, probably not always. And I'll eliminate that. And so the reasons, the justifications for elimination might be another week. So these skills are slow. There is a process of learning how to use all these tools, developing these tools, whether that's mapping, envisioning the author, developing the main idea, what else? Paraphrasing the question stem, identifying distractors. Those are the big ones. I might be forgetting something here, but those are so stripped. If you're deep into cars and you've done the Mcat a couple of times and cars has always been your nemesis, stop and go, this is a formula. The Mcat has a formula to cars. There are 9 passages. The questions are roughly, the main questions are, what is the main idea? What does the author agree with? What does the author disagree with? What's opposite the main idea? And what's a detail from the passage? That's kind of it. That's kind of the scope. As soon as you get into this idea that the Mcat has a formulaic setup for cars, then you stopped. You can't get overwhelmed with it anymore. You kind of see through that. And so that's where, again, these skill building is something that is processive. It is something that you do slowly but surely, and you'll end up with this toolbox full of good tools that you can use to tackle each and every passage.
And I certainly remember it being like a long haul like that it wasn't a weekend and I was good for cars. It was the whole like duration of my study period of 3 to 4 months and picking away at it and utilizing like the good resources and the good strategies and tips. And the Nova Scotia pun in me, I was like a lobster at the very beginning of cars, and I was always being trapped. No matter what I did, I was falling for these distractors and the traps that you made reference to, and it was just grueling to kind of have that early on. But then I really did see the gains and how valuable the practice was, right?
Don't you feel like there's a separate cars brain you have to kind of insert? You
100%.
have to kind of lobotomize yourself from the
100%.
sciences.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Actually, right before Mcat season, like April, May, I'll actually pull out cars passages, even ones I've done before, just to get back into the groove. Right? It's a different way of thinking than I normally do. And actually, I love suggesting like right before. And actually, Chancey, correct me what you think about this advice, because I've just kind of come up with it. But I feel like the day before the Mcat, I don't think you should maybe memorize some stuff and like review and just kind of reinforce some simple memorization stuff. But I think you should do maybe 5 cars passages and don't even look at how you do, just to get into like that groove, be able to switch out of science brain into cars brain quickly for the actual exam. So I think that's a kind of a relaxed way to go into the day before the midterm, the MCAT.
it's a ginormous midterm. It's just a big midterm. I'm trying to, you know what I did? I kind of did what you said in terms of took a break the last 2 or 3 days. Cars was the last thing I studied, so I'm true to what you said there. I don't know if it was the day before or just like the few days before. I would do a cars passage or 2 a day, keep it really light, try to read for pleasure, not think too much about time, and just try to get into that mindset of enjoying what I'm reading that we've been talking about from the beginning of this episode. And then, the small stuff, the small little formulas. But for sure, I totally echo what you said, that cars is a nice way to end your studying regiment before you write the real deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like you have to get into the mood. Get into the groove.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
What materials did you use for studying cars?
At first, like everything I could get my hands on, and that was a mistake. Yeah, big mistake. I think I had every prep company's books and was going through and learning different methods, trying to find a way to get better at it. After I realized my practicing was terrible and it didn't work for me. In the end, it was all exam crackers. Exam crackers, Prep 101 materials, those were the two that I sort of stayed true to. And then after that, I just grabbed whatever resource I could to get practice time on passages. Didn't look at the strategies for those books, but just more and more passages.
Yeah, I definitely think that the exam crackers has the most succinct set of tactics that you can use.
You like using them too and teaching from them?
I do. I love them. Actually, I will throw one under the bus, but I will say that any set of materials that you get, realize that the set of tactics and the system that they establish is not a cafeteria. You don't get to pick this skill from Kaplan and that skill from Prep 101 and that tactic from some other organization. You pick one horse for cars especially and run with it. Now, I love exam crackers. You know this. And it's a good reminder right now that the PrepMe podcast is in fact sponsored by Prep 101. And we use exam crackers books in our courses. And it is the best way for you to prep for your Mcat. But I will say this, that I'm going to grab it. The most recent...
Wait, hold on. You just had it there at your side? You love cars so much, you keep the books right there beside you at all times?
Yeah.
At all times, they're always with you.
Well, in all fairness, a lot of my Mcat books also act as a prop for my camera in different devices.
Okay.
But I did have...
ready.
I knew you were going to ask me about cars today, and so I did bring up this one. And for those of you who are watching on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see this one. This is the most recent. This is the 10th edition of the Mcat 101 Passages in Cars. I want to say that's 10th edition. I don't want to get that wrong. And you know what? Look, we're going to just reveal the fact that we are not beholden to anything our sponsors want us to say. The most recent exam crackers in cars sucks.
Oh, why does it suck? Why?
The passages are, the level of difficulty is all over the place. Some of the questions are, I actually had a meeting with a couple of other people who are like from the States who reached out and said, we need to like troubleshoot this book and kind of figure out if it's salvageable. And it was like a 2-hour meeting where we went through 2 passages and just gave up. And
oh, jeez.
And and exam crackers has admitted it's not good, and Prep 101 doesn't use it. But if you're just browsing the shelves and picking up some books, don't get that one. It must be the 3rd edition. The 2nd edition Mcat, the one with the more colorful cover, and I can show the YouTube viewers here, the Mcat 101 Passages, but it's kind of got purple and orangey, is way better. Like, this is much, much, much more representative. The newer one, it's just too hard. It's too obtuse. It's too beyond. I don't know. I just really struggle with it. When we first started using it and I first got my hands on it, I started going through it, and my scores were like 4 out of 6 on each passage, 3 to 5. I was like, oh my God. And I started to think maybe I shouldn't teach cars anymore.
I'm a phony. I'm a fraud.
I can't do this. I literally was like, I shouldn't teach cars. Yeah, my confidence was shot. And then all the cars people started talking, and we're like, okay, everybody in North America, all the cars instructors were like, this book sucks. Anybody else think that? So most companies who use exam crackers have switched back to the, again, 2nd edition. Okay. It's extremely good. And I know Exams Crackers is working on a new edition, but I'm not sure how far they've gotten with it. So anyways, just to show that we are not biased. We, in fact, are willing to speak the truth out of the materials and the courses that are out there.
And you just heard a real-time demonstration on how important it is to do your research on the resources you buy. Like, get reputable things, read forums, read what people are saying about them before you invest lots of money into these resources, because they're not cheap. So do your due diligence for sure.
All right, Chancey, I could talk about cars all day, but
I have no doubt.
I know. You know what? If there's demand from our listeners, then we could do more. I think one thing we should do on our podcast once is like send out a cars passage and just solve it together.
That's a great idea, actually.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Fun for one of us. I mean, it would be fun for both of us, but definitely fun for you. Educational for me and reminiscence. But I think that's actually a really good idea.
Well, anyways, I mean, we're finding our voice. This is a relatively new podcast, so please share wherever you find your podcast and all your friends. It's the PrepMe podcast. It's sponsored by Prep 101. We do have to say that. No, Prep 101 is a fantastic company, and the best way to certainly prepare for your MCAT's got the best instructors, best material, best schedule to get you to the scores that you want. And share us widely and I'd love feedback. I'm Tora. Which email should we use? I don't know what email should I use. Tora at prep101.com. I like to keep it a little bit arm's length. But anyways, TORAH at prep101.com. I'd love to hear your feedback, what you guys want to hear from this podcast. Would love to hear audience feedback. So
send in the ideas. Let us know what we are lacking and what you can't find online already.
But you're conveniently not offering your email address. That's fine. That's fine. I'll take one for the team here.
I'm not privy to the Prep 101 email. I'm still generic, but my generic is used for everything. And I just... like you said, you got to keep like 2 arms length. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to keep 2 arms length from it.
There we go. That's fine. I'll take the heat on this one. No, would love to hear from all of you out there that are listening. And thank you again for listening to the PrepMe podcast. And subscribe, download, share. Would love to hear your feedback as well.
Take care, everybody.